After more than 6 years of offering his testimony to the Swedish authorities, Mr. Assange has finally been offered the opportunity to do so. He is grateful to Ecuador for providing him political asylum, to protect him from extradition from the United States, and for facilitating this process with Sweden to enable him to give his side of the story in order to bring this preliminary investigation to an end. This absurd, politicised situation must come to an end. It is important to recall that Mr. Assange has never been charged. The testimony Mr. Assange has provided today is in relation to the exact same allegation that he was cleared of in 2010. The Chief Prosecutor of Stockholm, Eva Finney, concluded in 2010 that, and I quote, "The conduct alleged disclosed no crime at all and the file would be closed." The case was then formally closed. The preliminary investigation was then reopened by the current prosecutor. But 6 years on, she has, until today, refused to drop the case or to take his testimony, keeping Mr. Assange in a situation that the UN has found to be unlawful and amount to cruel and inhuman treatment. Mr. Assange remained in Sweden for many weeks to offer his statement, although he had no obligation to do so. After leaving Sweden with the permission of the authorities, we continue to offer his testimony voluntarily from here in London. The prosecutor refused and instead issued an arrest warrant to place Mr. Assange under detention for the stated purpose of taking his statement in Sweden, a detention request that the UN has rightly found to have been unnecessary and excessive. We know that since 2010, Sweden has utilised this procedure in the UK more than 40 times since. Sweden has refused to provide an assurance against extradition to the United States. It has approved all US extradition requests in the past decade. Such guarantees against onward extradition are commonplace in extradition proceedings and in asylum cases. Since placing him in detention almost 6 years ago, Mr. Assange has continued to voluntarily offer this statement that's been provided in the past few days. Since Mr. Assange was granted asylum by Ecuador in 2012, the Ecuadorian authorities have repeatedly offered the possibility of Sweden coming to take his testimony in the embassy. Sweden's prosecutor refused, first saying that it was unlawful, then making allegations about the quality of the interview if she were to come here. But the fact that it's taken place today shows that the stated reasons for refusing to hear his testimony before this were without basis. This could have and should have been done 6 years ago. This delay is unacceptable. It is the reason for his continued arbitrary detention. As the UN found, in placing him under detention without considering his testimony for so long, the Swedish prosecutor has fundamentally undermined his right to be presumed innocent, fundamentally undermined the quality of the evidence, and fundamentally undermined his ability to be able to defend himself. For this reason, in February, the United Nations found that his situation was unlawful and ordered that Sweden and the UK release him immediately and bring this matter to an end. Mr. Assange has fully cooperated with the interview that took place over the past few days. Despite our concerns with the irregularities in the Swedish process and the fact his Swedish Defence Counsel was not permitted to be present. He provided his statement so that the prosecutor has no excuse not to close this investigation. We expect that an impartial and objective consideration of the evidence that he has provided over the past 2 days will result in the prosecutor coming to the very same conclusion that the Chief Prosecutor in Stockholm came to back in 2010. Mr. Assange remains inside the Ecuadorian Embassy because he's been granted political asylum because of the risk of extradition to the United States. Since 2010, there has been an ongoing national security investigation into Mr. Assange and WikiLeaks for WikiLeaks publications, which should be protected under the First Amendment. That investigation has been described by the Australian authorities as unprecedented in size and scale. We know from court proceedings as recent as May 2016 that this investigation in the United States is ongoing. A principled approach to the First Amendment requires that this investigation is closed. I'll now take a few questions from press.
What can you tell us today about what happened today, the line of questioning and what happened with Julian?
I can't speak to what happened inside the proceedings, but he has cooperated fully and has answered the questions.
So 2 days were put aside. It finished in, a few hours? The Swedish prosecutor left around lunchtime, is that correct?
It took place over the course of the day yesterday and much of today.
If they drop the case, what will Julian Assange do?
Obviously, we're still concerned about the risk of extradition to the United States, and his asylum as granted by Ecuador remains. Unless and until that investigation is closed, he's still at risk of extradition, and without Sweden and the UK recognising that his asylum, as they're required to do under international law, he'll remain inside the embassy.
Have the Swedish prosecutors given you a timeline in terms of how long this might take? Sorry, just look up there.
Sure. We don't have any indication of how long it will take, but we know that the matter is now under consideration.
Did he agree to keep a DNA sample?
Again, I'm not permitted to speak about what happened inside the proceedings, but what I can say, which is a matter of public record, is that Mr Assange provided a DNA sample back in December 2010 when he was arrested at Sweden's request.
You said yesterday that there would be consequences from the irregularities in the process, the lack of perseverance in being there. Could you elaborate on that? Does that mean that you might challenge the admissibility of this evidence that he's given? What will be the consequences of the absence of a Swedish lawyer?
This will all depend on what the Swedish prosecution authority decides to do with respect to the case. We are hoping and we believe that the matter should be closed now that they've heard his evidence. But it remains to be seen, and if there is an indictment, we will be considering all of the irregularities and challenging that in Sweden.
If the case is closed, will he leave the embassy, do you think? Do you think that's likely?
As I just explained, Mr Assange is inside the embassy because he's been granted political asylum with respect to the United States. While the US national security investigation is ongoing, that risk is live, and since there has been no assurance that will be closed yet, and since the UK and Sweden have refused to recognise his asylum that has been granted by Ecuador, he will remain in the embassy.
Do you expect to see the atmosphere like in the room? Request from the US?
I'm sorry?
Do you expect to see the extradition request from the US?
The grand jury proceedings in the United States are subject to confidentiality, so we don't know whether there is an indictment that already exists that will be unsealed once this matter is resolved, and we're actively concerned about that, which is why he has asylum and will remain inside the embassy.
Can you tell us at all an insight into Julian's mind now that this is over? Is there any sense of relief or optimism that it is finally moving forward, or is that still that same sense of anxiety or uncertainty?
He's been actively offering cooperation with the Swedish authorities for more than 6 years, so he was understandably frustrated that it's taken this long for his side of the story to be put forward to the prosecutor. He does hope that now that he's been heard, that she will give it due consideration and close the case, just as the Chief Prosecutor did back in 2010.
Is this a massive step forward for him then, that he's managed to give this testimony, or do concerns still remain that we're still at an impasse here?
We hope it is positive that he's finally been able to give his testimony. Like I said, we've been waiting for this for 6 years. It remains to be seen what will happen, but of course our major concern is and has always been the risk of extradition to the United States. And unless and until that investigation is closed, he will remain inside the embassy.
Given the role that WikiLeaks played in the presidential election, would there be a move to ask the President-elect Trump to make sure that the charges are dropped, or the indictment is dropped?
Mr Assange has been under investigation by the Obama administration for more than 6 years, since 2010. We have continued to remain open to discussions with the United States government, and in fact our US counsel have written to the US government on numerous occasions, most recently just a few months ago, about the investigation. We would always be open to a conversation about closing it down.
Will you write to the new president on behalf of Mr Assange?
We'll have to discuss that with our US counsel, but as I said, we've written to the Obama administration, and no doubt we'll write to future US administrations until this is resolved.
How much of your concern comes from the treatment of Chelsea Manning in terms of what might happen to Julian if he is released here, but taken back to the States?
The treatment of Chelsea Manning gives a caution and warning about the treatment that Julian can expect to receive should he be returned to the United States. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has found that Chelsea Manning's treatment amounted to cruel and inhumane treatment, and we are of course very concerned about that, and that formed part of the basis of Ecuador's decision to grant Mr Assange asylum back in 2012. So we remain concerned about Chelsea Manning's conditions in United States prison. We look forward to the appeal, and we will be following that appeal very closely, and the way that she has been treated has of course contributed to our concerns about what should happen if Mr Assange is extradited to the United States.
Have you been given an explanation to why the Swedish council was not allowed into the embassy?
We have not yet, but it is a major concern for us, and we will be taking it up in future if the proceedings continue.
What was the atmosphere like in the room? Could you describe that?
I was not in the room myself. I was inside providing assistance to our Ecuadorian Defence Counsel in breaks, so I can't speak to what happened in the room.
What have you been told?
I'm not allowed to speak about anything that happened in the
Today's
proceedings.
proceedings seem to be over quicker than expected.
Were they cut short for a disagreement
As far as I'm aware, it took place just as expected, and he provided full cooperation.
And how is there?
Mr. Assange is feeling more optimistic at the end of today?
We're all feeling much more optimistic. Mr. Assange, of course, is more optimistic now that the Swedish prosecutor has finally heard his side of the story, that there's an opportunity now for this matter to be closed, and we hope and expect that it will be.
And how is the embassy cat holding up? A lot of stress.
It's not really time to be answering questions about a cat.
Sorry, next year Ecuador will have election in February. Do you worry about, maybe Assange will worry about if the conditions change, if something happens, the president change?
Ecuador has granted Mr. Assange asylum under international law, and we expect that the Ecuadorian government and any future Ecuadorian government would respect that grant of asylum. Thank you.